Salon here at Arena Stage. So thrilled to see all of you here. This is our very first one, so we're very excited about that because it's the great Jackie Maxwell. And Jackie has been a friend of mine now for over 40 years.
Yeah.
When I was a young artistic director in Alaska at Perseverance Theater, I was very interested in Canadian writers and Canadian theater makers because I felt like Alaska and Canada were very similar to each other. So I ended up at the Banff Festival, and who was there? Jackie, who was already a very important director and dramaturg, and she also was an artistic director. Was it?
It was Factory at that time,
the Factory,
I think, yeah.
At the Factory. And we used to sit and drink a lot, as I recall, Jackie.
We did. That was a sort of required part of the activity, for sure. But we did talk a lot as well.
Yeah.
And talked a lot about things that mattered to us, I seem to remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a time when there were people like John Murrell, Urjo Kurita. These were all people that, for me, I learned about dramaturgy. Mm-hmm. I learned about how to really look at a play, how to dissect a play, and how to support an artist bringing it forward.
Yeah, it was an amazing place. And one of the things I do remember, though, it had a big gym. It was sort of a whole place where, you know, people could do various things in a swimming pool and whatever. I don't think we used that much, really. But and there was always these sort of competitions going on where it would be poets versus playwrights and all the, you know. So it was a place where everything was sort of infused by literature of a type. So you didn't feel too nerdy. I mean, everybody else was the same. You were, no matter what you were doing, you were talking about art. It was a great place.
Not only was it that nobody was nerdy, but that everybody wanted to be there.
Yes.
Everybody there, great storytellers, really invested in the art of the theater, and so it was a fantastic place to be as a young person. And I've continued to know Jackie, but even more so, probably about 20 years ago, when she came here for the Sondheim Festival. Do you all remember when that was? What year that was? Probably 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, about that.
And we got back together again, and at that point, I had become artistic director here at Arena Stage from Alaska, and Jackie was the artistic director of the Shaw Festival, which is one of the largest festival theaters in North America, absolutely, and one of the two largest in Canada. And we just said, oh gosh, we have to work together, and we have to figure out a way to understand this thing that's happening to us as female artistic directors of these major institutions when this is such a rarity. There were very few women around North America that were artistic directors. So, okay, what's the craziest roadblocks you had as a woman artistic director at the Shaw Festival? And you don't have to mention names, Jackie. I mean,
No.
You can. We're among friends.
Oh my goodness, where do I start? It was, I remember one of the funniest reactions that I got right off the top, and this was, I got the job. I was very surprised, you know, because I was very honest about what I wanted to do. I was honest that I wanted to. It was a very respected institution. It was a very successful institution, run by a gentleman called Christopher Newton, very smart man. And when I actually was asked to apply and then asked to interview, I decided I would be very honest, which I've always advised people to be in those situations, I have to say, like, be honest, because don't try to fake it. And I said that I felt that, yes, of course, there was some wonderful programming going on, but where were the Canadian plays? And where were the plays by women? And I said that that would be something that I would be focusing on putting into, like building the mandate of the place to include that. And so I talked a lot about I wanted to increase musicals. I wanted to have small, funky musicals as well as just the kind of the biggies. And so I sort of said everything that I would do, and thinking, well, that probably will be it. But in fact, they kind of went for it. But when eventually I had to go and do a whole press day, they picked up on the fact that they said, can you talk about how many women are directing at the Shaw? And I said, oh, that's one of my major things. I said, I'm going to be doing plays by women. I'm going to be bringing in female directors. There have been very few. And literally one guy said, well, where are you going to get them? And I said, oh, they're everywhere. Just pick them up, get them on the street. No, so I remember thinking like, wow, it was like I was saying I was going to put off a nuclear bomb outside Niagara-on-the-Lake, It was, the reaction was so stunned. So that sort of began a series of reactions that I would often get when I would announce certain things. I would say, I want to do on the festival stage, which was a big theater, the big one like you guys have. We had 3 theaters. And I want to do a translation of a play by a Quebecois, French playwright. You want to do a French play on the festival stage? I said, well, yes, but not in French, clearly. I want to do a translation. And there was a sort of, okay. And in fact, we did it anyway, despite that slightly lukewarm reaction. And in fact, I sat with the writer, a wonderful guy called Michel-Marc Bouchard, that you know, Molly.
Right.
And he was, in fact, the first live playwright ever to sit at the Shaw Festival and watch a play of his, any play that they'd written. So, so there were new things that had to be done, and they all, lots of them got great reaction, but there was almost always a kind of, sort of reaction to certain things by certain groups. Yeah,
it's a little bit like what happened here.
Yeah.
Because this theater, glittering history, was Zelda Fitzhandler and Doug Wager. And Zelda really, as you all know, had more of a focus on Eastern European, Shaw, Chekhov, Ibsen, the classics, and she had a big theater company. And then Doug came in and made some changes because he started doing musicals, which was fantastic. And then when I spoke to the search committee, David Schifrin's here from our board, they said, what would you do? And I said, well, I'd either do all international work, because this is a city that is about embassies from the world. It is a world dynamic here. Or I would focus on all American work. And they said, what would you do? I said, all American work. There isn't any major theater in the country that's focusing on this way. And so a lot of people became excited about that. And again, I was being honest and was surprised when they said, we want you to do this. And then I began talking to the staff and more of the board, and people said, but you can't really talk about how you're going to do all American work. And I said,
you just slip
I think eventually they're going to figure it out. What is going on? Where's my Shaw, Chekhov, Ibsen?
1, 2, 3.
So I would have people who would call me and say, I'm really angry. Where's my Shakespeare? And I said, there's 70 theaters here. Shakespeare Theater is here. You've got another theater doing Shakespeare. You've got Folger. You know, that's the beauty of Washington, D.C. Theater. But it was really, really interesting because when you change a mandate, of course, there's a strong response. And for us, it was a strong response with more audience eventually, as I know it was for you as well. So Jackie has been here directing, and I'll bet some of you have seen some of her work. Junk, Good People, Dear Jack, Dear Louise, Watch on the Rhine. And she's just won the Order of Canada, which is the highest award you can receive in Canadian theater.
I know, and I should have my pin on, and I left it in the hotel room. I'm feeling terrible. Anyway.
We're imagining it, though,
Sorry,
Jackie.
Canada.
We're imagining it. So the other thing that you did when you made the shift in Canada is you made a shift from only doing Shaw to also his contemporaries, writers who would be like Shaw in one form or another. That didn't happen immediately, but it happened in time.
Yeah, because what I really wanted to move on, I mean, there had been Shaw and his contemporaries before, but what I wanted to do was, because, I mean, he lived a long time. He lived 90 years, slightly over. And but there was a real cutoff point. So there were great contemporaries that one could do, but the cutoff was in, I think, 1950. I forget all my Shaw dates now, but I think it was certainly close to 1950 when he died. So thank you, thank God, an expert in the house.
He was 95.
Yeah, he sure was.
1954.
Yeah, it was, you know, so that was our cutoff. And what I thought was, how do we open that up, but stay true to, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Shaw. I'm a huge fan of, you know, the notion of what he was arguing for and about. And so I thought, well, maybe let's say, why don't we open it up to include people who were what we ended up calling contemporary Shavians. Now, some of this is, you know, you sit in a room and you work out how you're going to sell something, I guess. But actually, what it really did was it allowed us to open up. It meant that we could do more Canadian plays, because Canadian plays didn't really come to the fore until the 50s, and then really going through. It meant that I could start doing plays like by Brian Friel or Tom Stoppard. And then eventually also, when I built a small sort of studio theater to start bringing in more people, I was able to do Susan Laurie Parks, you know, who, as far as I was concerned, is, and she loved the idea that she was a contemporary Shavian.
Yeah.
She thought that was, oh, wow, okay. So to me, the idea was that you can expand your programming and still, I wanted to stay true to the idea. I didn't want to just shift, I wanted to stay true to the idea, and yet bring in all of the wonderful writers who were, in fact, doing that work. And so that's really what people used to laugh, and sometimes they called it Jackie's elastic mandate. And it was a little bit, and there is no doubt. I elasticized it here and elasticized it there. But I felt that I kept to the spirit of what the place was. And I felt that was very important for me.
And you've been gone for about a decade now, right?
Yeah, I think it's 9 years maybe.
So I'm going to ask Jackie just a personal question, because all of you know that I'm going to be retiring in July after happily being here at Arena for 25 years. So what kind of advice do you have for me, Jackie?
Well, you know, I think that, and I know that you will do this, I think that, I mean, okay, I'm going to say something, and I'm guilty of it myself. There is, in order to run a big institution, there's a lot of things that you have to be, and people would say part of that is control. You have to know how to control. And, you know, my kids would sometimes say perhaps even control freak could be used as a you know. And I think that's the one thing that I realized. I was, you know, there was lots of things I was totally happy not to be in control of anymore or worried about anymore. But just actually going, I'm not the voice anymore. I'm not. And to really, I mean, it seems so easy to say it, but I started to enjoy that much more quickly than I thought. I was worried. I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to get used to this. This is going to be weird. You know, I'm just, you know, and I'm always going to want to be running something or making the decisions or, no. And I think that there's this sense of really consciously going, and really consciously letting it go. And experiencing what that feels like, because it's not perfect, it's strange, but I really made myself. I kept just going, Jackie, just kind of go with it. Every now and again, you know, I'd hear something that was going on in the theater, and I was kind of like, I don't think that's a very good idea, you know. And then I would go, let it go, let it go, and that's my. You know, and I think you will too, because what I loved always working here, there's many things I loved about working here, I will say. But one of them was, for you as an artistic director, I never felt that you were kind of there to sort of check in on whether I was doing the work appropriately or what you wanted or whatever. I always felt you were totally supportive. I could go into your office and go, okay, wait a minute. How do I do that? This bit's tricky, or I could always do that. But I never felt that you felt any need to control what I was doing. I felt trusted. And so I think that there is in there, even though you are brilliant at controlling so many things, that you will be able to let it go.
Thanks, Jackie.
Yeah, I think you will.
Yeah, there is a part for me as artistic director that I always feel like my job is, how do I get this particular production in terms of this director's vision? How do I support them through the best notes that are going to take them there? Some artistic directors want to make every production in their own image. I'm not interested in that. I love it that there's so many different voices that come in, so many different perspectives. And Jackie, you didn't just come into my office saying, oh my God. Jackie would come into the office and say, why did you saddle me with him? And I'd say, Jackie, I knew you would have a great time ultimately. And then a week later, she'd come in and say, it's still awful. And then a week later, she'd come in and say, okay, under the cone of silence, it's starting to improve. I can sort of see what you were doing here.
Yeah.
But the whole control thing, I think, is really important, because there are times, even now, because I'm around 5 months out, when I can feel myself with the hands on the wheel, and I take them off. I grab them again.
Yeah.
And I take them off, and I just, this is what I'm going to need to do, and this is
Okay, so this
great.
adds, this was, Molly said to me, she warned me, she said, now you should have some questions in your pockets too, knowing that I would not just simply sit there and be questioned, and that I would come. But it is a question that occurred to me, and I've been asked this question before, and I think it's a good question, or certainly it was a good one for me to think about. If you are asked, somebody said, what would be your first answer, whether you are a director or an artistic director?
Such a great question.
Yeah.
I think I became an artistic director because as a woman, there was never a chance of directing. I think that's one of the reasons that I did that. I think I also became an artistic director because I wanted to form the mandate of the theater. I started a theater in Alaska called Perseverance Theater that I ran for 19 years. So I've actually been an artistic director for 44 years.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
But I think that there are parts of being an artistic director that I love more than being a director.
Oh, you see, that's
You know,
so
because
interesting.
it's like overall, it's overall ideas. It's how can we make all these big things and big ideas happen? How could we make the Mead Center for American Theater happen? How could we drive it through programming? How could we go out and raise the money? How could we, you know, and this was something with the board, with the staff, how could we work with the brilliant designer and architect Bing Tom to make this a center for American theater? I mean, that was a huge joy.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, too, it was, how can I change the programming in such a way that it's reflective of this city? And that happened. That happened. So we now, in our audiences, a third of our audiences are people of color because almost half of our programming is. So it's reflecting more of the city, whereas when I first came in, it was almost all white audiences. And so now there's a real dynamic, a real conversation that's being had. As a director, that would have never happened. As a director, you go from city to city and you go in, and what's beautiful about it is you can make a mess and then leave.
Yeah.
And then the artistic director gets to take over.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was lucky to work at Jackie's Theater at the Shaw Festival several times.
Yeah.
And
You
I
were
don't know if
lucky.
I made a mess. I think as an artistic
I
director,
don't think
I
you
didn't
left a
make much
mess.
of a mess.
No, you did not leave a mess.
No,
Ever.
no, I didn't
No,
leave a mess.
no.
I didn't leave a mess.
I think it is an interesting question for people who are, I find it an interesting question as well, and I had to really think about it. But I don't think that I'm quite the same, because you are such a builder. I mean, I've run 2 theaters, but in both cases, when I finished at Factory Theatre, which was a theatre completely dedicated to new Canadian work, Canadian writers, and it was a kind of at a time when there was burgeoning writers from right across the country of all, you know, skins, denominations, everything. It was quite a wild time, and so I loved that. But when I finished, and I finished basically because I was exhausted. I had two babies while I was doing it. It was one of those theaters where you had to sort of like clean the toilet, you know, answer the phone to the box office. You know, you sort of did everything while getting these shows on. And it was a very beloved theater in Toronto. It still is. And but interestingly, so people, I just said, okay, I've had enough. I've just got to like take some time. And then people said, so what's your next theater going to be? And I said, oh, it didn't occur to me to run another. I just wanted to direct plays.
Wow.
And I think that's so. And then eventually, the Shaw came up. It was quite, you know, a few years later, but it was very specific. It wasn't sort of, you know, several theaters had kind of come by, and people would say, you know, why don't you apply for that one? I'd sort of go, I don't know. I don't think that's. I don't know how I would connect to that place. Or, whereas eventually with the Shaw, I was actually working at the Shaw when doing a show there when I was talked to about it, because Christopher was leaving. He had made it very clear, and that's when I kind of went, you know what? There's something really interesting about this place and what you could do about this place. And so I think I'm not as much of an artistic director as you are. I have to be hit very specifically, and then once I'm hit specifically, then I kind of go. But even like when I finished Shaw, people were sort of like, oh, well, what next? And I'm going, no. And I think I sometimes approach directing a little bit like it's a project. You know, it's a project that I have to build and people and take care of, and you know, so I think I use some of a lot of the
Tools.
same skills and tools. But it is, I've always thought that you are so much, and I mean, I think you're a wonderful director, of course, but I think you are such an artistic director. I've always thought certainly more than me.
Well, I've loved it.
Yeah.
You know, I've loved it. And it probably is because, unlike you, I don't have children. And so, in a sense, they became those creative forces for me.
Huh, that's
and,
interesting.
And that's part of what I adored about it. And maybe that's what's going on with me now. Well, the baby is now, for me, 25.
Yeah.
So it's time to pass the baton to the next generation. And that was true at Perseverance Theater, too, because I've been there 19 years. And it was time to pass that.
it on. Yeah.
I'm a serial monogamous
Yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of being an artistic director.
But
Because for me, it had to be really important, because I'd had
Yeah.
a lot of people say to me, do you want to come and audition for this theater or be artistic director at this theater? I always said no. It wasn't until Arena came calling.
Oh, okay. So, yeah.
It wasn't until that moment when I thought, one of the great theaters in the country, one of the top theaters in the country. And it's like, ooh, that's interesting. I could work with a bigger stage. It's a very political city, and I love that because I'm a very political person. And it ended up being that Washington, D.C. was Juneau, Alaska, writ very large, because it was also a capital city. It was also about those kinds of politics. So, what's the absolutely luscious work going on in Canada right now that none of us know about?
Okay. Well, there's some really interesting playwrights in Canada, right across Canada, and their work is. I mean, Toronto is the center, of course. It's a very big city, and it's a very big theatrical city. But interestingly, they're kind of bouncing across the country as well. I think as we opened, there are all sorts of indigenous playwrights that have come to the fore, have been coming to the fore. A long time ago when I was running Factory, I remember there was a writer. I went up to Sioux Lookout to work with some way up north, to work with some indigenous writers. And it included this guy called Thompson Highway.
Brilliant.
And he was, and his brother, beautiful brother, Rene Highway, who was a dancer who, alas, is no longer with us. And he was, what was so brilliant about Thompson, he talked about, he said, I want to write a play about the women on my reservation, which eventually became the Rez Sisters, which was his huge first enormous step onto what became the international stage. But the wonderful thing about Thompson, so eventually a lot of people came down from up north, the whole group of them down to Toronto, and there was a native center there, and in fact the Rez Sisters played there, and then I took the Rez Sisters and played it at the Factory so it would, get another run. But what Thompson did that was so amazing, I said, what's the next play? What's the next play? And he said, I've got different work to do. And he formed an indigenous theater company. And that, he believed, was the most important step that he could make at that point. And of course, he kept on writing, but it took a lot of his focus. So that is still paying off. I mean, he's not the only one. There's all sorts of indigenous theaters now, but he really was someone, and because his focus was so much to build and bring in more writers there's some extraordinary work happening there for sure. And now the plays are getting done at the Stratford Festival, and they're all over the place. They are sort of seminal Canadian plays, a lot of them now, as well as the new ones. There's young artists who are very interested in kind of, it's not so much multimedia, but using a lot of movement, a bit people who aren't so, it isn't quite so text-based. I mean, I'm a very text-based person, so, but I'm happy to always go and see work that is not necessarily coming from that point of view. So there's a lot of that work happening, or else there's work like we were talking about a piece tonight called 15 Dogs, which is based on a piece of Canadian literature called 15 Dogs by a writer called Andre Alexis, which I saw just a few weeks ago, an extraordinary piece by this very, very talented, directed by this very talented young woman, Marie Farsi. And it is, I mean, people are dogs. And I have to say, I was a little bit like, really? People are dogs? I'm not so sure. But it's fantastic, and they don't have woolly tails or anything like that. It's much more sophisticated. But I was joking with the guy that runs Crow's Theatre that was putting it, and he said, I've started to realize what Canadians love. Literature, Canadian literature. And it's really true. So the other big play that's going across Canada at the moment is Anne-Marie MacDonald's Fall on Your Knees.
Yeah.
Which is a huge and very ambitious piece. It's an adaptation of this, huge novel. And it's, you can't get a ticket at all. And I said, that's so funny. I said, do you realize as a person running a theatre, you've just said to me, I know what Canadians like, books. And I said, so I guess we all should just be running out, looking at what it is we're reading. And but it's true, and it's, I mean, what do you do in the winter in Canada? You read, I mean, come on. So I think actually there's been a lot of turnaround, of course, of people running theatres now. There's some wonderful people, a wonderful woman called Wayne Mengesha, who's running Soul Pepper Theatre now in Toronto, they're just opening that play English.
Yep.
That was on.
Yep.
Not
That's
a Canadian
studio theatre.
Yeah, and so I feel that there's a whole. Really, I feel very heartened by what's happening in Canadian theatre at the moment. That there's a lot of turnaround, and in spite of the fact that they all had to get through COVID, of course, which was awful, and I really felt for the people who were. I was so glad that I wasn't running a theatre, and I felt, and I would talk to Molly, I would talk to all sorts of people that I knew, and I just thought, oh God, that's hard. I had SARS, which was like nothing. I realized. I mean, it was its own deal, but I mean, really, so there's no doubt that has made things more difficult. But there are people pushing through. Mm-hmm. I think it's in a pretty, and it's nice because I'm lucky enough now. I get asked to go and direct at some of these places, and I sometimes feel I'm a bit like asked as an elder statesman, but I try not to be elder statesman-ish. I try to be very sort of open and not
I don't
give
think
my
you could
opinion.
ever totally be an elder statesman. I mean, you have the gray hair.
I have the gray hair. I do have the gray hair. But other than that, I think I'm a bit more funky and fun.
I don't think you could do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'm so curious, Jackie, about the evolution of your own work, because as you can see, I mean, you can hear everything in her language about being a dramaturg, being a literary advisor, being a wonderful director. But at a certain point, you started to switch into musicals. Why? What was it? What was it? What was it that suddenly made you think, oh my God, I'm going to try this. I'm curious about it, or I should just take the leap. What was it?
Well, I mean, okay, I hope this doesn't sound pretentious. It could, but I don't mean it to. It's really, to me, music is another kind of language.
No.
And so there was something that I found fascinating about the idea of like, okay, so you have movement, dance, often, and you have words, and you have, music. And how the hell does that all fit together? you know, and people who really do it. I mean, you know, I watch, and especially because Molly, you do such, you know, beautifully complex music, and you do them in that space over there, which is no joke. And so that to me, it was kind of, I thought, I've got to give that a try.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to know how do you bring those things together? Mm-hmm. And how do they enhance each other? Mm-hmm. And I'm always very interested in musicals that have good texts, mm-hmm. you know. Mm-hmm. So it's not that it's not that I've done lots and lots, but by any means. But, and also I will say something that I love is that there's a bunch of you.
Yeah.
There's like a team.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah.
It's like you're behind the table, you know, normally, I'll have people that I'm working with, or I'll have, you know, great designers. But when it's that you've got your choreographer, then, you know, you've got the musical director, big time. So it's never just you making the decisions. You know, you've always got sort of like, well, what do you think? Mm-hmm. You know, or somebody wonderful will go, you know, what about this? Like there's more ideas coming into the room. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think I just really started to love the notion of how do you put that all together and make it a whole. I mean, I think I sort of summed up for myself in my last year. I don't think you've done this. I think you've been very good. In my last year at Shaw, I decided, okay, it's my last year. I'm going to choose. I usually did 2 shows a year. Sometimes 1, but more often 2. And I thought, but I was always very sort of like, we've got to get the balance right, and you know, the shows that I want to do, I might have to wait for a week or a year, or, you know. But this time I was like, okay, I know the 2 shows that I want to do, and we're going to do them. We're just going to do them because it's my last year, and I want to do them, which is not usually my attitude. And so I did Sweeney Todd and Uncle Vanya. And somebody said, well, Jackie, you have just summed yourself up completely by that choice. Stephen Sondheim and Chekhov. And I said, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, and that Sweeney Todd, woo!
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah.
That was great. Yeah, it was really, really dynamic. I
Yeah.
didn't see the Vanya, but I saw that, and
Yeah.
it was terrific. Yeah, Jackie at one point called me and she said, I'd really like you to come and direct. And I said, well, what would you like me to do? And she said, Mac and Mabel. And I was like, oh my God, Jackie, no one does Mac and Mabel. Is there a reason why no one does Mac and Mabel? And she said, well, it's Jerry Herman. And it actually is sort of brilliant.
It's beautiful.
It's about what happened when silent pictures moved into being talkies, you know? So it was like Mabel Norman, right?
Yeah.
And it was about Mac, what was his last name?
Sennett, wasn't
Sennett.
it? Yeah, Mike Sennett.
We've got our expert here.
Thank God.
Mac Sennett, but the music in it is extraordinary. And my favorite moment was Jerry Herman actually flew in to see it. And he came in and saw it, and he was the kindest man. He said to me, if it had been this production, it would still be running on Broadway. And I was like, wow. And he said, and now I have notes for you.
Yeah.
He pulled out this thing, and I like, oh my God, I thought you said it was so great. And I wanted to do it here in Washington, D.C. He said I'd never be able to do it here.
Wow.
Because I hate the critic here.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. He said, yeah, I wanted to do it because I thought it would be great in the round. And he said, no, it would destroy me to have this destroyed.
Oh my
But it is a great, great musical, but very complicated, as we know, because musicals are always based in one way or another with love at the end. If you look at a piece of musical theater, it's some kind of intense love at the end. And that one doesn't end with love. So we worked very hard to make it end in love, and we did it visually.
Yeah,
we were able to
right.
find out a way to be able to do it. But you were very canny that you wanted something like that.
Well, I did try to sort of in the choice of musicals, not necessarily always. Or, a board member put it well. It's curious, Jackie, that often your choice of musicals are not the obvious choice. And I would go, yeah, and he went, yeah. Often, too, they don't sell like the obvious musical. And I was kind of like, oh, really? Is that on purpose? I went, no, that is not on purpose. I'm not trying to find things that don't sell to put on the stage. But yeah, so there was always a sort of, I would always have a few people that would go, oh, Jackie, what about, and I go, no, everybody's doing that. Let's do something else.
Let's do something else.
Yeah.
But it's the Shaw Theater,
Yeah.
the Shaw Festival. You need to be able to do that. In about 2 minutes, I know you have some burning questions, so you will be able to question us. But I just have one more big question for you, because I think you've answered a lot of these. And in a way, you've really answered one of the questions on America has really been going through a whole wave because of We See You White American theater movement that came to prominence during the pandemic. And in a way, you're already answering that, about the way Canada is answering that in your own work.
I think so. I think that, there's been a lot of discussion, and it's been hard. It was hard for some people. It was hard for, I think because it all happened at once. Then there was COVID, and there was a sense that, things were shifting. But I think, and the conversations were, I know I know there was all sorts of conversations at Stratford. There was all sorts of conversations at Shaw, like the really big, the biggest theaters had to have those conversations as well as the smaller theaters. But I certainly feel, nothing is, it's not all fixed, it's not all better, but there have been real shifts. There have been, and it's funny because as someone who was part of a shift in terms of women in theater, and even going through what did it mean to have children and go into theater? Like at Shaw, I remember they said, oh, when your first season, we always do our brochure shoot in the first week of September, and I said, oh well, actually, that's the first week of school, so I can't do that. And well, then we do these breakfast meetings. And I said, I can't do breakfast meetings because I have to get my kids to school. They were still quite young, and so eventually, we just changed things around. We didn't have breakfast meetings. Like, who cares? Who missed not having breakfast meetings? Really? Come on, and and so I use that. I use that as a very specific example of how things changed, and I use that as a very small example. But there was a lot of things changed over that time because of bringing women and families into the situation, and I think that what I'm seeing, and it's larger. The politics are different, but I feel that the shifts are there. I really do, and I'm very curious, and I'm happy because I'm now going to, in the next couple of years, go and work at a couple of those theaters run by some of these new younger artists that are working there, and I'm really looking forward to it. I want to know, how does this theater work? How does what I do, how is that going to work in here? What am I going to learn? What will maybe you learn? Who knows?
That's great.
But I feel quietly confident that some change is definitely being made.
That's great.
More could be, but some is.
So do you have one other barn burner question for me before we turn it out to the audience?
I guess that,
Your
Is-
foot went up, so something's going on.
yeah, I know. I just want to say, I wrote it so well. And look at the, okay, I want you to see, look at the size of my piece of paper as compared to Molly's piece of paper, okay? Just pointing that out. Okay, do you have a core belief? Did you start in this world, in this job, with a core belief that has shifted? Or have you felt that those main core beliefs that you had have stayed with you?
Such a great question. Well, one core belief is I wanted to do theater that was through American, and I meant North American artists. That's why Canada has been a strong part of it. And I wanted there to be all of this range. But where it shifted, Jackie, is when I really moved into wanting to do theater that was even more political, because this is a political city. And the amount of pushback I got on that was crazy. My friends, other people would say to me, people in this city are not interested in political work. And I said, yeah, but we live, eat, sleep politics here. They don't want to see it in the theater. Wrong. So that was something that actually was a transition that happened from the kind of work that we were doing, where suddenly we were able to dive further into it. And in the beginning, it was a little spooky because people were having such a reaction to it. But one of the core beliefs I came into here is, in talking to the search committee, it was, whatever you do, whoever you choose, you're going to need to choose somebody who wants to drive a huge building project. Because I'd gone to Arena in the 70s, and coming back in 98, the buildings were neglected. They were not in good shape. It looked like a modest library. And this is one of the greatest theaters in the country. It has to look like it.
Yeah.
What are we going to do?
Yeah.
You know, and the board and the staff, I mean, everybody was amazing about coming on to that. So that was a crazy dream that we all had. And I remember I'd talk to all of the actors who would be coming in on productions, and I'd show them all the plans, and I'd talk to them, and they'd go back in the dressing room and go, she's like a nut. This is never going to happen. They've told me this recently, and I'm like, really? You were all so enthusiastic. They said, we're actors, Molly.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I get it. And we never suspected this could happen. We never guessed it could happen. So I was like,
Good.
well.
Yeah, but you did.
Oh, I did. I knew.
Well, there you go.
I knew. And it was, I was willing to put my feet in the fire for it. And I was willing to dig down deep. And we got lots of no's, and we got lots of rejection, and we got lots of pushback all the way through the whole process, didn't we, David? And it was like we just stood in the fire of our own ambition and ideas and made it happen.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was kind of something surprising, and then we did it. Okay. I'd love to have, does anybody have like a burning question? An exciting question, a terrifying question? Yeah, we've got a mic right here.
Oh.
Can somebody grab a mic for him? He's right here, Jody. Jeremy, maybe you can get it in.
Mic right here?
Oh, there's a mic
Oh.
from Rachel.
Oh, you got it.
Okay. It's on.
Thank you. You may not want to answer this question, and I can understand why when you hear me ask it. I'm a Canadian. I have lived in this country for 47 years, and all the prior in Canada. And if you were producing or directing the same production for a Canadian audience, and then for an American audience, are there things that you would do differently?
No. Well, actually, hold on. Let me be more clear about that, because only in the sense that breaking it into Canadian American, no. In the sense that when I go anywhere to direct a play, or if it's been my own theater, or when I'm going somewhere else, I do try to really get to know what is the world that I'm going to be working in. What is the audience like? So in that sense, I think, yeah, I take that in. But in terms of, I have to say, the Canadian American, I don't know. I've never, when I've come here, or when I've taken shows to, Chicago or wherever, I'm kind of going, this is what it is. This is what I believe. This is how I believe, this. I remember I took St. Joan. I did St. Joan at Shaw, and we took it to Chicago Shakespeare, and it was the big tent scene where the French and English get into this it's pretty tough Shavian argument, but if if it's done well and you're really following it, it's pretty amazing. People were like, yeah, whoa. In Chicago, people were on it, totally in it, and kind of yeah, right, way more than it had been in Niagara. I loved it. I thought, okay, these guys are really getting this.
Yeah. And I find a big difference between audiences here in Washington, D.C., and audiences in other cities, and I would say in Niagara-on-the-Lake, too.
Mm-hmm.
Here, the audience is so bright, you actually can move through ideas more quickly than other places. They're picking them up. And sometimes when we would bring, we were bringing The Originalist about Justice Scalia around the country, we were in Pasadena, and I went backstage right after the show, and I said, Ed, slow down. They're not getting it. We're going to have to slow down the entire show so that they understand it in a different way. What I found about Canadian audiences is they adore laughing. So finding as much laughter as you can in what you're doing is a big payoff.
Yeah.
So there was a big difference there. But it's very different from city to city, like what Jackie's saying.
Yeah, I think that's more where I find
someplace like Chicago, rough and ready town, tough town, like that. Yes?
What sources of information would you use to judge your future audiences, and how might you restructure a play as it's performed for that audience?
Oh, that's so interesting. I don't think you know until you get in front of the audience. I think you can talk to the artistic director, you can talk to artists that work there, they can give you some feedback on it, but it usually isn't until you're in the room with that audience and see, are they leaning in, are they sitting back, are they bored, are they not responding, are they not laughing, are they muttering to each other, asking what the heck is going on? You feel an audience, as directors. You're sitting in the midst of the audience, and our job is actually to be have that sensorial piece going on, to be able to judge it, and then you go back in with the actors who are also feeling the audience.
Yeah.
Because every time they're in front of an audience, it's a very different play, right? Because the play gets created between the audience and the actor, and you'll sit in the back, right, at rehearsal the next day and say, this moment they didn't get. Let's talk about how we get there.
Yeah, and sometimes the other thing that I've found is that if you change the space, there's a wonderful, Molly's worked at this theater, in a theater in Toronto called the Tarragon Theater that does all new work. And I did a play there called The Memory of Water. And it was actually a British play, which they didn't do very often, but it was a beautiful play, and the production was a humongous hit. It just was bango. It was very funny, very moving, all the things that you want, et cetera, et cetera. So it was picked up by the Mirvishes, which are big, sort of commercial producers, and was put into this quite big theater right downtown. And oh my God, I thought we were never going to find it again. I felt that we'd lost it. And we were in this big space, and it just takes place really in a kind of bedroom. And I was like, oh, this bloody bedroom looks like it's in, I don't know where, a long way away. And then they kept saying, we want to mic the actors. And I was like, oh, no, it's not gonna, there's got to be some other way to do this. And eventually, slowly, as always, because actors are great, really. The actors are sort of going, okay, we're gonna, but it took preview after we slowly had to find the way of making that play work in a totally other room.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking, whoa, we didn't really think this one through.
Yeah.
We were just going, okie dokie, great stuff, thank you.
We're gonna go to this other big theater.
We're gonna make
It'll
lots
be
of
no
money.
problem. Exactly.
But so it's more that, I think. There's very specific things that you have to be careful about when when you're putting any play on in terms of spaces and so on. That's why I think I've worked in 2 of the spaces here. I've never worked in this space, which I love, of course. But yeah, it's those are 2 such different spaces.
And I love it in this theater that the only proscenium house is this one. The
Yeah.
smallest theater. The only proscenium house is this theater. The Krieger is a modified thrust, and the arena, which is the largest space, is in the round. That's exactly opposite to most places.
Yeah.
Most places, it's the proscenium that's the big house. And it makes, each one of these spaces are completely distinctive.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So, do I see a hand back there? Do we have one more question? Yes. Is that David?
Yes.
Hi, David.
Indeed it is. Hi, Ollie.
There's your mic.
Oh, thank you. First of all, I want to give, is it on? First of all, I want to give a very belated thank you to Jackie Maxwell. 20 years ago, when you were first an artistic director, you sent Elisa Palmer down here to Washington to talk to my drama discussion group, Footlights, about Diana of Dobson's.
Oh, right.
We had a whole series of plays that we discussed that year, all with women as central characters. And we ended with Diana of Dobson's, and I had this fantasy that I could get Elisa Palmer to come down and talk to us. And she did, and that was wonderful.
Good.
So I want to thank you all these years later.
Oh, you're
I do
welcome.
want to ask you, is there anything that you miss about having been an artistic director that you really loved, and it's sad that you don't do it anymore?
Yes. I mean, you know what I do miss? I miss when I go to the theater and I see a play or I read a play and I go, oh, let's do that. As opposed to, how can I wangle that someone might be interested in? It's a whole other thing. So I do miss that. I miss that notion of the discovery and going, oh, wouldn't that be great to put on that play? I mean, that's such a big part of it. And the other thing that I do miss, which is different from the theatre here, of course, is that the Shaw Festival has an acting company, and that's a huge part of running that organization, because you have I don't know, 50 to 70 actors, it depends each year, that you are kind of responsible for. I mean, not responsible for in terms of their daily lives, but I mean, essentially responsible for in terms of maintaining the sense of the company and thinking. But so it's complicated. Remember, we used to talk about that.
Yeah.
Like that extra thing, and yet, I think about walking into my office or going to the green room, and especially on a Saturday, because I really promoted, that for some reason, I don't know, I was some kind of marriage fixer or something. It was a lot of weddings. A lot of people got married, and because I think I brought a lot of younger people in, and and so there was a lot of weddings, and there was a lot of children, and so Saturday, the weekends, like the place just became like there was like crashes. There was like it was, and I miss that. I miss being in that kind of involvement and watching young actors grow, and all of that part of it. But I miss it in the sense of I think of it with nostalgia. I don't think of it daily. I just don't feel that way anymore. But I think of it all with huge pride and fondness, and I'm really glad I did it. And which is how Molly's going to feel.
Absolutely. 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 Although I don't know if I'll feel that way about the company because we don't have a company.
No, you don't. It's different. But you'll feel it in terms of you
totally.
have such
I'll
a
feel
great
it.
group of
Yeah,
artists in
yeah,
Washington.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's
I'll feel it in terms
it
of the
feels
artists.
that way.
But I think the other thing is really right, which is, here's a project we need to be doing. Not artistic director anymore.
Yeah.
Can't do it. Yeah.
I
think
know.
that'll be big.
I'm quite famous still for sort of like kind of manipulative little conversations I have with people. Who go, do you know that play? Do you like?
Have you heard about that one? We have time for one more. Yeah.
I was just curious, Jackie, you hinted at a shift after the pandemic. Is it that audiences want to hear something different, or playwrights and directors want to say something different, or what I want to understand the shift that you...
I think that there are more, and as there should be, there are more voices to be heard. And I think that there's a realization, and there is a building realization. It's not like a finished realization. It's a building realization that there are more voices that should be heard. And that's what I think is in movement, and I think is exciting. It's like anything, it shifts, the ground is shifting, and that can be, daunting. But I think that certainly what is coming through is fascinating and should be. And we just have to keep, looking and watching. But it's happening.
Yeah, I think that there's something to look at historically, which is here in the United States and really in Canada too, although I think Canada had more resident theaters earlier than America did. Having a regional theater was in reaction to theater happening in New York. And there were 3 intrepid women who moved into that in America. Zelda Fitzchandler here at Arena with her husband, Tom, and Ed Mong, and 2 women in Texas. They said, we can do great theater in our own communities. Revolutionary idea. And now there's like 1,400 theaters around the country. That's a revolution that's been won. So for years I've been saying, so what's the next revolution? And I think we are in the midst of the next revolution. I think all the things that Jackie's talking about, I think that the evolution of so many new people who are coming in as artistic directors, as managing directors, so many more artists of color are having their plays produced on Broadway in the resident theater. It's just, there is a veritable explosion in all of the right ways. Here at Arena, we know that quite well because for the past 25 years, a third to half of what we've done has been artists of color. So in a sense, we were ahead of the curve in that way, right? But it is happening countrywide now in a very, very exciting way. The numbers of new voices that we're hearing, it's extraordinary.
Yeah, and it's happening. I don't think it's happening in a way that we can sort of sit back and go, oh, good. Well, that's because it hasn't happened. It is. We're in the midst of it.
Yeah.
And we should be. It's got to.
Yeah.
We've got to not sit back in any way be satisfied, which we never really can anyway. But certainly in this case, we certainly can't.
Yeah. And those kinds of changes happen in the theater. Women artistic directors. We were a rarity. There were like 5 of us around North America for major institutions. Now there's probably 10.
Yeah.
Be better if there's 20. But change happens. Slowly sometimes, but it happens. And it always happens for the betterment of the world, I think.
Yeah,
And
and
the
that's
theater, it
why,
makes it
you know,
richer.
that requires, that's what I always, it requires openness, and it requires the ability to, for some of us to stand back at times, and then it also, on the other hand, is that for us to help and lead as well. It's double, you
Yep.
know. It's not, and as I say, we're still on that journey for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's not a spectator sport. It's active. I'm going to say that we're at the end. However, the bar is open. Jackie and I will be out at the bar. If you guys want to get some drinks, buy some drinks, we'll stand
I'd
out
like a
there and
drink.
talk for 45 minutes or so, or however they let us keep the bar open. But come back. There are another 7 of these. There's going to be a surprise guest that comes in later in the time. We're just trying to get her all wound up. But hasn't Jackie been a great first guest?